Welcome back to Foodie Down Bronx. I'm your host, the Hungry Dominican. Our next guest is the co-founder of WokeFoods, a socially conscious cooperative that focuses on Dominican food. Please welcome to the show, Ysanet Batista. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I was at the panel, as I'm sure you know that. I mentioned it already. I had said to Miss Washington that I was really happy to be there because it got me really thinking about my relationship to food, where food comes from, how I think for a long time I just thought of food as just this thing that I needed just to get energy and that's it. Never really thinking about how it got to me, right? And I grew up in Washington Heights, so for me it was like my only relationship with food was like, mom makes it, I eat it, right? Mango, this and that. And then I was looking you up as well, and I mean, you were in Forbes, which is very cool. Congrats on your New York Times piece as well. So can you tell me about WokeFoods? Because I found out so much of it, but I'd rather just have you explain to me what WokeFoods is about.
Sure. WokeFoods is a food service and food justice business that runs as a worker-owned cooperative, which means that the people that work there also own it. And so it is also led by women of color, me included, and we focus on making Dominican food plant-based or vegan, and then we do this through catering. We also teach cooking classes, and we facilitate food justice workshops.
So how long have you been a vegan yourself?
I would describe my diet more plant-based.
Okay,
As a
okay.
farmer who is really interested, for example, in beekeeping, and also has been learning more about like animal husbandry and chicken and eggs. I do consume eggs. I do consume honey, and so my diet wouldn't be by definition vegan.
Okay.
Would be more plant-based.
Right.
And I've been exploring and trying this diet since 2013. Yeah, since 2013. Oh, it's 2019, so it's been a minute now.
So, yeah. And I mean, of course, you feel the ramifications of having that type of diet. Like you feel better, right? You have more energy. You definitely, it's a diet that when I started doing it, so I've been doing it for about 2 months now, and I'm at the finishing point.
Yeah.
But I say this all the time. It's like I can't deny how I feel because of it. Also, it's definitely made me. Even before the panel, it's made me more conscious about the kind of foods that I'm eating, because now I have to sort of choose or pick alternatives, and not just go for like a steak and just like that's it. Now I have to sort of find my protein somewhere else, and I have to get more creative with the meals that I make at home, which is basically what this diet has been. It's been basically homemade meals because going out is sort of like difficult. So when did you fall in love with cooking? What made you want to go into the world of food?
I've always loved cooking since I was a little girl. Even though I was born in New York, I spent a lot of time in the Dominican Republic, so I did have to learn English when I came back to New York. And I remember as a young person watching a lot of Food Network, and pretending to like have my own cooking show.
Oh yeah, sure.
I made my first like caldero of rice, I think when I was like 10. And I was always very attached to my grandmothers when they were in the kitchen, and both of them were very like receptive of me like learning from them. So I've always loved cooking. And then I got more into healthy cooking when my mom was diagnosed with kidney stones, and she had to drastically change her diet. So we had to remove soda from the house. We had to remove certain things that included calcium. And as a young person, I didn't really think about nutritional content of food. So being like, what has calcium? And so
Right.
like having to like learn those type of foods, learning about foods that have certain vitamins and different other nutrients that were good for our body, or we were deficient of, things like that. And so, yeah, it's sort of been my whole life that I've been interested in cooking, but I took it much more seriously in 2015, 2016, when I got sick with parasites while living in the Dominican Republic,
Right.
and had to just change my diet a little bit more, return back to home cooking,
Right.
because I was eating out a lot
Yeah.
in the Dominican Republic. or not eating out, but like I'd go to like the comedores when I was working instead of like preparing food at home and bringing it to work.
Right.
And that's really where I felt like inspired to just prepare my own foods and think about what was going inside my food after being diagnosed with like all those parasites.
Yeah, I was feeling this. My body was feeling different for a long time. That's why I sort of challenged myself to do the vegan thing, because I got to a point where I wasn't like overtly sick. I was just feeling very weird, just like not like my energy was low.
Lethargic.
There you go. Right. And so I was like, all right, let me just do this whole thing. And then, like I said, it just made me more sort of conscious about the kind of like foods I eat. And it's not, it's not that hard to have a vegan diet or a plant-based diet, especially with like Dominican food, because all you do is like you cut out the meat and anything else you can sort of just, you're okay with. Your plátanos and, rice and beans, of course. And, you had mentioned in the panel very briefly that a lot of this takes its toll on you, what you do. And I asked this to Karen as well. How does it take its toll on you? How do you feel mentally after a week in the world that you're in? I'm sure you have a lot of resistance. You had mentioned actually in the panel, you said a lot of people feel challenged by our mission. But I'm okay with that because I know there's power in our own communities. That challenge part, like what can you elaborate on that?
Sure. When I first started community organizing, it definitely took a toll on my mental health. I started getting more panic attacks, increased anxiety, increased depression, would have migraines, because the work was hard. I first started organizing with a group of Dominican women that were looking to address anti-Blackness in the Dominican community. And so I remember once we had this big event called Reclaiming Our Independence, where we were really exploring what our independence meant, if it meant sort of saying hateful things to our Haitian brothers and sisters on our Independence Day, and how we celebrate our independence from Haiti, but we don't celebrate our independence from Spain, who colonized us more times than Haiti, and we don't celebrate independence from the U.S. And that event, nationalists showed up there and were threatening us prior to the event. I had friends that were asking, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to go against our country? We're so proud to be Dominican. And so it was really hard to explain that I am very proud to be Dominican, and also that part of being Dominican is embracing our identity, our African heritage. It's important to transcend across these fake borders that exist between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And so that was really hard. And then the more deeper I got into the work of social justice and racial equity, and sort of merging my passion of food with that work, it didn't get easier. And I got really lucky to get into the world that Karen Washington is in, of farming and meeting other farmers of color who would invite me to their farms upstate. And I remember the first time I put my hands in soil and doing that community farm day that Karen talked about. I did that, and I felt so emotional. I felt so connected. I felt like healing coming through my veins, like the roots of plants. And there I realized that nature and Mother Earth is really important to this work, and everything is intrinsically connected. And so I'd say, similar to Karen, that is my ancestors, that are supporting me. And so I am also a spiritual person. I think a lot about the work that my ancestors have done and having to then push the work forward, and also understanding that maybe the things that I'm fighting for will not be accomplished in my own lifetime, but I can definitely push the needle ahead.
Wonderful. All right, guys, grab yourselves a snack. Foodie Down Bronx will be right back. Welcome back to Foodie Down Bronx. I'm joined on set by co-founder of WokeFoods, Ysanet Batista. Let's talk about the healing traditions of Dominican food.
Yes, let's talk about that. Where do I start? I think I want to start with the basics. When you think about like Dominican food, you mentioned as someone who like grew up with like your parents cooking your food, and I'm sure in your kitchen you had something like a pilon and a caldero, right?
Absolutely.
And so our foods, yeah, are like just very healing, like innately are just very healing, and things like mashing garlic releases like cancer healing properties. Making sofrito from scratch is really like the best option.
Yeah.
We do, believe it or not, a lot of our foods are like gut healing because we end up using like vinegar in them. And then also just the love that goes into our food. A lot of people discount that. But a few weeks ago, I was making rice and I hadn't eaten rice in a while, and I also hadn't been back home in a while, and I started crying because the smell like transported me back
Absolutely.
home. And we don't often, a lot of people in food and wellness don't think about like the connection between memories and food, and so like all of that is a healing tradition. And unfortunately, a lot of Dominicans that have migrated from the island or have maybe moved from campos to cities are depending a lot more on packaged processed foods. And so companies like Goya have been taking our foods like sofrito, tostones, yuca, and have processed and packaged them, put them in boxes, frozen them, and sell it back to us.
The first time I saw that, my mind like exploded. I couldn't believe that there was like frozen tostones. That to me was like very.
It doesn't taste good either.
I couldn't even imagine it would taste.
No.
Yeah, that's I never really thought about that. It's like it's becoming so homogenized. Like the idea of like all these foods that we grew up with that we do have like this sensory connection to. Like when we smell something, we think about our families. Like for me, it's like whenever I make mango, which is maybe like the only really good plate that I can make, it's because I remember seeing my mom making it. And literally like asking her, how do you do this? How much do you put this? How much do you put that? And now it's like, yeah, it's like now it's becoming this like, now it's becoming packaged food. It's taking away from how special our foods are.
Exactly. And I think also our people forget that, and they don't think about the process that packaged food has to go through to get to us. And so you have to add additives and certain ingredients for it to be preserved and stay in an aisle for weeks and weeks and weeks. For by the time you buy it, it's fresh or it tastes good, doesn't taste spoiled for you. And so I don't think a lot of us end up like thinking about that process. And so with WokeFoods, we definitely want to remind people that making things at home as much as possible is really the best way.
And WokeFoods has cooking classes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that this is the type of stuff that you let your students know.
Yes.
About how so many of these frozen foods, all these packaged foods have all these preservatives and all these extra things that really shouldn't be in our food.
Yeah, my favorite part of the cooking classes is the education piece. So as we're like making certain foods, we'll like throw different snippets in there of like food justice. And one of the things we share is encouraging people to go back to home cooking because also the pressure that a lot of food service workers have is out of control. Like
you talk about it in the panel, and that was really interesting. Can you elaborate on that? Because I really want people to hear that.
Sure. I mean, this is just something I have been thinking about. When we order food through Seamless or Grubhub or through any of these restaurants that we have, we can order it at any point in time, 24/7.
Right.
And when the person that knocks on your door, what do they look like? It's usually a black or brown person. It's usually an immigrant person that that needs to work. And unfortunately, a lot of these restaurants and food service companies are not paying these people a livable wage, or at least not a wage where they can thrive. Maybe they're surviving, but they're not thriving. And so we there is a lot of pressure to like produce at fast rates that I don't think we can keep up with in a way that's ethical and just. And so for us through the cooking classes, we just want folks not to completely eliminate the habit of eating out, because eating out is also fun. I do it all the time. But for the majority of your food to be prepared at home, to be prepared intentionally, that you know you're seeing what you're putting in your plate.
Right. And so having that accessibility to food all the time, it's really a detriment. It's really negative for us to have access to these, like you said, Grubhub, Seamless, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and that's just creating this other sort of subculture in the food world where you're having people of color working long hours, not getting paid, because somebody just wanted something at 5 in the morning or whatever.
And then we forget like Karen mentioned, the value of this work. Working in food is really hard. It's like spending a lot of hours standing up. If you're cooking food from scratch, we spend a lot of time chopping and processing and ensuring that everything is fresh and good. If you also like are a farmer, there's been days where I've woken up really early to harvest food myself and then go to the kitchen and cook it. So these are like really long hours if you are a food company that is doing things in a more intentional way. And so there is a lot of value in our food compared to maybe another food company that is not paying their employees a livable wage and is underpaying them. And so they're saving or cutting costs through labor versus like we are putting value in our labor. And so our food may be through like the catering portion of our company will be a little bit more expensive than maybe a company like I don't know, but other food companies. And that's something that I myself didn't think about until I started working in this field. And so it's important to put our money into companies that are thinking about creating ethical ways of cooking food.
I agree. So before we wrap up, I want you to tell me about the community gardens that you're involved in. You also talked about it in the panel, and I mentioned to Karen, I was like, I don't even remember the last time I was in a farm and now a garden. And I feel like I have to sort of, pun intended, go back to my roots, right? Because like I have so many farmers in my family in the DR. But having lived here all of my life, there's that disconnect, right? So can you tell me about the gardens?
Sure. The other day I had to go on Instagram, like record the farm that I apprentice at. Because every time I tell people that it's on the Grand Concourse, they're like, a farm on the Grand Concourse. And yeah, I have the privilege of doing my apprenticeship. I'm currently in a certificate student at Farm School NYC, and I've been there now 3 years, and I'm studying urban agriculture. And so part of the program is doing an apprenticeship at a community farm or garden. And so I get to do it at New Roots Urban Farm, which is on 153rd and Grand Concourse. And it's pretty big, and we have a farmer's market that runs on Tuesdays from July to November at 3 p.m. And then I also sometimes do work or classes at Kelly Street Garden, which is a garden that's in the basement, like an outdoor basement of an affordable housing unit on Kelly Street. And then because another worker owner of WokeFoods, Francis, is the farm manager of La Finca del Sur, I'll spend some time there too. And those are pretty much the 3 farms where WokeFoods will source food from.
Fantastic. All right, guys, stay connected with Ysanet by visiting WokeFoods.coop and following WokeFoods on Instagram. Well, that is all for the show. Thank you again for tuning in, and thank you to our guests today for joining us. Tune in every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. here on Bronxnet, Optimum 67 and Fios 33. Also tune in on the go at bronxnet.org and find us on YouTube. From Bronxnet to the world, this is Foodie Down Bronx. I'm your host, the Hungry Dominican. Remember to feed your mind, feed your body, and if you see me coming along, feed me. Adios.